Kedves kollégák, köszöntök mindenkit ezen a kies délutánon. Lehető legideálisabb időjárás tudománnyal foglalkozunk, méghozzá nem is akár ugyan, hiszen Rómából, a Német Történeti Intézetből jött el hozzánk Andreas Rehberg professzor, akit most először nagy szeretettel magyar nyelven köszöntök, és ő fogja tartani, ugye sorrendben, milyen zsinatok történetében, milyen korszak és milyen zsinat fog következni. Ugye a reformzsinatok, Konstanz, Bázel, Ferrara, tehát már a reneszánsz korban és a 15. századnál tartunk. Angol nyelvű lesz az előadás, rálátsz egy ilyenre, hogy Rómában hogy megy például a tanítás és bárhol máshol a világon, hiszen ez egy frekventált téma. Rehberg professzor úr kiváló kutatója ennek a korszaknak, Német Történeti Intézet munkatársa Rómában, nagyon híres, rangos intézet, 1880-as években alakult, és most egy honlapját majd tanulmányozhatod, most egy modern épületben, a Via Aurelia Antica mentén, Villa Doria Pamphili árnyas, kies píneái alatt található modern épület, hát így a 70-es éveknek a NSZK-s dizájnjában. Egyik legjelentősebb központja a történettudománynak, az egyetemes történettudománynak, és tulajdonképpen Rehberg professzor urat mi visszahívtuk, hiszen volt olyan kedves, hogy 2022-ben a vatikáni sorozatnak több kötetét bemutathattuk ebben az intézetben, és akkor megbeszéltük, hogy ő is el fog látogatni Budapestre. Itt látod a kutatócsoportnak a vezérkarát, Nemes Gábor, ugye a képről és a bemutatónak az alkalmai, itt ül Rehberg professzor, jobbra tőle pedig a vatikáni levéltárnak a korábbi prefektusa Sergio Pagano püspök, tehát, hogy úgy mondjam, ezek az előadásnak a történeti előzményei. Végén, ha jut rá időnk, és valószínűleg jut majd, lehet kérdéseket föltenni, 1-2-3 kérdést, és most még egy rövid dolgot, hogy 4:30-től a 706-os teremben, 4:05-től a 706-os teremben fog tartani professzor úr egy másik előadást, olasz nyelvű lesz, és nagyon-nagyon érdekes. És ha te tudsz valamennyire olaszul, akkor gyere el, ha meg nem is inspirálódni akarsz, hogy milyen jó lenne megtanulni, akkor is gyere el. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to introduce you, Professor Rehberg, Andreas Rehberg, Senior Research Fellow of the German Historical Institute in Rome, and we are very, very proud that this lecture will give to us now. Please.
Thank you so much for the introduction, for the presentation. I hope you can hear me also in the background. Many thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to talk today to you in your wonderful capital. It's wonderful to start a talk at Vilmos Fraknói Historical Research Group of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and the Péter Pázmány Catholic University. I will introduce briefly the program with reference to the slide. Next one. We will start with an overview on the topic Councils, Emperors, Legates, the major factors of the council period. Then we will give an introduction in the question, what led to the councils in the 15th century? We will talk about which sources are used, and that we can divide the question, the major series of papal writings in the Archivio Apostolico Vaticano, abbreviated with RRV. And I will talk about the research tools we have, the Hungarian editions, and the Repertorium Germanicum. What do these sources tell us about the major events? And then we will specify the ways from the Roman center in Rome to the periphery of the Christianity, to the Church of Hungary. What are the ways you had to go in the medieval times to find your place at the Curia, the center of the Christianity, the Pope? And one of the questions will be, what we do learn about the lower clergy, not only legates and cardinals, and how did communication take place? The task of the cursores and other people engaged in the race from Rome to Hungary. Let's start with the observation. Without the Great Western Schism, there would have been no reform councils in the 15th century. Pope Gregory XI died shortly after returning from Avignon to Rome, where this conclave was held. At the beginning of the conclave, the College of Cardinals comprised 16 members, 11 of whom were French, 4 Italian, and 1 Spanish. The Romans put pressure on the French, whether they were cardinals or employees of the Curia, because they wanted at least 1 Italian as the new pope in order to prevent the Curia from being relocated to Avignon again. Avignon was the great problem in the 14th century because it was a place very distant from Rome, and the Romans had no profit of the Curia. You may understand the Curia also as an economic factor. Bartolomeo Prignano, as head at the papal chancery since 1377, the year before the conclave, was also no stranger to the French. He was a known man. The conclave, which was at times tumultuous, led to the election of the Neapolitan after only 1 day. When disagreements arose between most of the cardinals and the new pope, 13 cardinals left Rome and traveled to Fondi, on the border with the Kingdom of Naples, where the French dynasty of Anjou ruled. Together with the Aragonese Cardinal Pedro de Luna, and supported by the French King Charles V, they elected Clement VII as antipope on September 28, 1378. Thus starting the schism. The root cause of the schism was the cardinals' pretensions to condominium with the Pope and Urban's fierce determination to end them. The Christianity fell into 2 rival obediences. One supported Clement VII and his successor Benedict XIII, Pedro de Luna, the Spanish cardinal, Pedro de Luna. The other supported Urban VI and his successors Boniface XI, Innocent VII, and Gregory XII. So you see here a card with the dividing lines which divided the Christianity. The French, who were enemies of the English, followed the Pope in Avignon, while the English followed Rome. So you can see that political factors and religious ones were mingling. A number of disaffected cardinals from the two rival obediences sought to end the schism by summoning the Council of Pisa, which only resulted in the creation and of yet a third pope, Alexander V, who reigned from 1409 to 1410, soon to be followed by John XXIII, who reigned from 1410 to 1450. Let's go to the next slide. Here you can find the main bibliography, not perhaps the most important, but the main for me in preparing this lecture. You can see the title of the main book about the Council of Constance, written by now Cardinal Walter Brandmüller in 1909 and 1907. Herbert Müller has edited a really important volume on the conclusions of the conciliar epoch, working much on the Council of Basel, which is one of the following appointments of the Church in the aftermath of Constance. And then there is a book you can surely find also in Hungarian language, I think so, dedicated to the Council of Constance and the Hungarian Empire, curated by Attila Barani and published in 2016. And then there's now the Cambridge History of the Papacy, published in this year, with important contributions by Blake Beatty and Benedict Serre, a French student and professor. The driving force behind the Council of Constance that ended the schism was Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary. He became the de facto president of the Council of Constance. The participants were divided into nationes. That is a clear sign of the changing of the national input which gained the Christianity in that time, that epoch. The nationes had been known from the university distribution, and now it was a good deal for the council to divide the participants in factions and to give an input for the new election of a new pope. But first they made a decision which caused a lot of trouble in the Christianity. In fact, they condemned Jan Hus, the reformator from Moravia, to be burnt as a heretic on July 6 in 1415, creating another problem, the Hussitic Wars, which involved also Hungary. The main success of the Council of Constance was the fact that after the deposition of the other popes, Oddone Colonna, a member of the Roman baronial nobility, was elected unique pope on St. Martin's Day in 1417, and the Colonna pope took the name of the saint of the day, Martin V, and became Martin V. In reluctant obedience of the conciliar decree, frequens from the October 1417, which called for regular councils, Martin summoned first the ill-fated Council of Pavia in 1423, and then came the hour of the Council of Basel. Basel is a city in now Switzerland, and it hospited the Council of Basel from 1431 to 1449. It was more radical than the Council of Constance and justified the primacy claimed at the top of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. In this crucial period between the Western Schism and the Council, the Pope in his double body was increasingly desacralized. So the Christianity thought about the own structure, and the answer of the Council was, we have not only one head in the Pope, but we have also a head in the Council. And that was the cause for many conflicts, you can imagine. Eugene IV, the successor of Martin V, was accused several times in Basel of violating the ancient canons, like the Council of Chalcedon. The Council of Basel finally broke with the Pope in 1439 and elected Duke Amadeo VIII of Savoy as Pope Felix V. So we have again two popes, one of Rome and one of the Council. In December 1431, Pope Eugene dissolved the Council and decreed that it be moved to Bologna in 1433. Eugene IV dissolved the Council of Basel again on July 31 in 1433. In the following year, in 1438, he convened it in Ferrara and later transferred it to Florence. There it became a union council. It has the reconciliation of Rome with the Orthodox Church was celebrated, because we had just before the known schism from the Roman to the Greek Christendom. According to Francis Oakley, there was a politics of oblivion on the part of the Pope toward conciliarism. So, in the papal historiography since the 16th century, there is a tendency to minimize the episode of the Great Schism and the conciliarism. The latter, the conciliarism, was considered an accident in papal history, quickly closed. In the perspective of the Cardinal Juan de Torquemada, a hierarchic theologian, conciliarism became the ideology of heresy, attributed by him to Marsilio of Padua and William of Ockham, because it was interpreted as the ideology of resistance to the papacy. Brian Turney and Francis Oakley demonstrated that conciliarism was derived from the 12th century canon law, thinking on what Hosiensis and John Teutonicus stated in that time. So the church history was interpreted always in the way where this was more common for the ideology which was proposed. The conciliary theory put the council about the Pope and the papacy, and the Pope was arguing that he was the head of the church. Let's take a look at the protagonists of our lesson, which explicitly mentions emperors and legates in its title. The King of Hungary, Sigismund, first we can show the, okay, that is, oh no, that's before, okay. Now we are, the next one. So this is the right one. For the bibliography of conciliarism, you can see some titles here, and I want to show you the title of Thomas Münch, which is interesting also for Hungary, also it is concentrated to Poland, because it's interesting that the council movement involves the main learned person at that time, and was also a training moment for the humanists. And so we will encounter in our talk many names which are important also for humanistic research and the movement of the learning at that time, concentrated in the discovery of classical models. So, the first person I want to talk about is the King of Hungary, Sigismund, who was King of Hungary since 1387 and became Emperor in 1810 and died in 1437. He took advantage of the difficulties of Antipope John XXIII to obtain a promise that a council should be called in Constance in 1440 to settle the Western Schism. He took a leading part in the deliberations of the Assembly, and during the sittings traveled to France, England and Burgundy in a vain attempt to secure the abdication of three rival popes. The council ended 1418, having resolved the schism and of great consequences to Sigismund's future career, having the Czech religious reformer John has been burned at the stake for heresy in July 1415. The complicity of Sigismund in the death of HAS is a matter of controversy. He had granted HAS a safe conduct and protested against his imprisonment, and HAS was burned during Sigismund's absence. We will come back to all the military consequences in this execution. So, let us start with the sources we are using in Rome for papal history and council history. The major series, now the next slide, we find in the Archivio Vatican archives interesting, the Holy Emperor and Hungary too, and we have a lot of overviews on the history of the Vatican archives. And the first title is from Leonard Boyle, who was one of the biggest scholars of the Vatican Library and the Vatican Archives, and gave in 1972 an overview on the foundings of the Vatican Archives. The German historian Péter Pázmány described the great series in the archives, and in English it's really important to have a look to the tradition of the researches of Brigitte Schwarz, Careers and Opportunities at the Roman Curia, which is excellent for an introduction on how the Curia worked and how the documentation is, what it's the functioning and the profit of the Vatican documents. So that is a good study for beginners. Anyone who deals with Vatican material, such as the editors of the Repertorium Germanicum I will introduce now, but also researchers from Hungary, such as Thomas Fedelish and Peter Tuscher, it is initially overwhelmed by the sheer volume of material that needs to be worked through. For the period from 1378 to 1521, a total of more than 5,000 volumes of supplication registers, chancery and registers, and chamber registers with thousands of entries need to be examined. In addition, the official books of the papal financial administration, which are now also stored in the Roman state archives, must be included. According to Hermann Diener's calculations, around 16% of these entries in the late 14th century and so on, first two-thirds of the first two-thirds of the 15th century concerned German recipients. However, only a small fraction of these documents have been preserved in German archives, which is, by the way, why the Roman tradition is so valuable for German, and surely for Hungary too. We came to the Hungarian editions, and that will be the next slide. Much has been done from Hungary for the research of the Vatican documents. My overview here isn't exhaustive, but I have to call for attention to the Diplomata Pontificum, edited by Paul Lukšić, which I will abbreviate with MHI, second volume. And then Cameralia Documenta Pontificia, which is always from Lukšić, but Joseph, it's a...
the uncle, his uncle.
Okay. And it is, but it is republished in 2014.
First edition remained only the manuscript, and this is the first edition.
Okay. Tamás Fedeles had made excellent work about the apostolic camera and the Hungarian church benefices during the conciliarist era, and Nemes Gábor had made Repertorium Pontificorum Documentorum Regnus Sacri Cor Hungarian Existentium, and he was presented the volume also in Rome some years ago. So Nemes Gábor lists nearly 80 papal documents from the Pontificate of Eugene IV that are preserved in Hungary in original or copy form. Paul Lukšić's work in 1938 included 934 entries, but his work is only a selection from the Vatican archives when we look, for instance, to the not considered cameral acts. The number of lost documents is therefore enormous. This makes the Vatican tradition all the more important. What is now handed down locally may be found in the large series of registers in the apostolic archives. Now we come to the Repertorium Germanicum. I will abbreviate it with RG. It is a flagship enterprise of the German Historical Institute, DHI, nearly since its foundation in 1888 as a Russian historical station in the Eternal City in Rome. Today, I would like to present the potential of the RG for those studying in the Roman Curia and its links in Central Europe, particularly with Hungary. Beyond the interest in news about Hungary found in the Repertorium Germanicum, which of course for the most important events rarely supplements what is already known from the MIHI just mentioned. My presentation aims to raise your awareness of the need to look at the small things that can now be discovered with the help of indexes and large databases, such as the LG Online. Here you can see the addresses, and now I show you the mask of perhaps it's lacking. Okay. Online contains the source material of the Repertorium Germanicum and the Repertorium Penitentiae Germanicum, two big enterprises of my institute. Repertorium Germanicum is dating back to a proposal by Ludwig Quiddel, director of the Prussian Historical Institute, from 1890 to 1892, and later winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, surely for other reasons. He was a known anti war politicism. The Repertorium Germanicum comprises German incidents from all Vatican Register series and cameral holdings, from the Great Schism to the Reformation in 1517. But we now have only at Innocence VIII. To date, material up until 1484 has been published. It's the Pontificate of Sixtus IV. In the meanwhile, work has progressed until the second half of the 1480s. So RG is now not only useful for ecclesiastical, local and territorial German history, but is also a valuable source for social, economic and education history. Written in Latin, the register are arranged as far as possible to the name of the petitioner, be that a clergyman, a nun, a layperson, or an institution, convent, monastery, city council, and so on. The database introduced translation guides from Latin to German on the system of abbreviations which were created for that purpose. The database RG Online includes the Repertorium Penitentiae Germanicum II, abbreviated in RPG. The penitentiary is the ultimate Vatican authority in the field of sins, with the right to exempt and to acquit. Its archive of records was opened only in the 1980s, enabling the creation in 1992 of a new Repertorium Penitentiae Germanicum series headed by Ludwig Schmuggel. The RPG contains the full text of all petitions directed to the penitentiary that concern the people, churches and territories of the German kingdom. The registers of penitentiary petitions extend from 1410 until the abolition of the chancery by Pio V in 1559 and make up around 150 volumes. Unlike the Repertorium Germanicum, the printed entries in RPG aren't abbreviated, but are following the original extension. In addition to the contents shared with the RG, the RPG offers an in-depth insight into the conflicts of conscience experienced by believers in the late Middle Ages. This basic research project was completed with the publication of volume 11 on the Pontificate of Pope Adrian VI. We are therefore not dealing with a source edition, but rather with a repertory, a finding aid. Three basic principles applied to remember for the RG. First, the RG consists of abbreviated Latin register, which are facilitated by the fact that the source documents are already highly standardized and require precise terminology, that of canon law. The register serves primarily to condense the source text to the core elements of its content, which is indispensable given the sheer volume of sources. The system of abbreviations used will be discussed in more detail in various sections of our presentation. But you can see here just the main steps with the work of the editors requested. You have the original documents and then the abbreviated register. A register is a condensation of the main contents, and the contents are really much more bigger than the registers, which are giving the main points of the topic treated. So we come to the second principle of the RG, and this is that individuals and institutions, churches, monasteries, cities appear multiple times in a pontificate as petitioners and addresses of papal letters. Their subjects are grouped together in chronological order to form so-called name of or place lemmas. Here is one example to the cleric Vitus Turces, which is collecting all the entrances we have for this cleric in the Pontificate of Paul II. The personal data is often somewhat misleadingly referred as vitae, which in the case of many clerics would be better described as description of the career in terms of ecclesiastical benefices. It has incomes from ecclesiastical offices or revenues, since they primarily reflect the increase in requests for and transfer of benefices and thus the spiritual career of a cleric, insofar as this is reflected in Roman sources. That's an important point, because you couldn't think that this is complete information for one person. You have always to think about local documents which could be integrated in this career. The third point is that the RG reproduced only the spelling of the individual persons, usually Latinized in the case of first names according to the original. It is therefore up to the user to identify, for example, Johannes Faber as Hans Handwerk. Here in the example you found in the first line an alternative lecture of the name, and so we did just first step for identification. But in the case of Johannes Bavaria or Johannes Bayer or Paya Konapi, it is practically impossible to be always in aware that it is the same person or not. So you have to look if it is if there are other names who could be interesting for a person. Next one. An overview of the many approaches possible to the RG is offered in the recent volume Die römischen Repertorien, neue Perspektiven für die Erforschung von Kirche und Kurie des Spätmittelalters. In this book we put together many topics you can deal with the Repertorium material. And there's a book review in English, so you can have a first area. The next one. Okay, this is a reference for this book review in English. You can imagine that the arrival of new databases are changing our possibilities to work on the RG. And so I give you a next slide with one of the indication of one of the contributions, which is illustrating the networks you can find in this Pontificate of Eugene IV. And this is dedicated to the executors which are engaged to give help to the petitioners to gain their benefices from the curia in the local church. And that was a passage you have always to remind, that you have on one hand side the papal documents, which are the official reclaims, but it is not that these claiming the benefits had a consequence, a local consequence, because the many benefices had been objects of litigation and refusals of the local cleric to accept an external concurrent from the curia and their letter rulers from the Pope. And so the task of the executors had been to realize the difficulties and to give help, legal help to the claimants. But there had been specialists in this task, and you can see that some people are more requested for this task than others. And so we have here a good example what you can do with the databases, new database in the DH, in the digital historical perspective. So we come to the point, what do these Vatican sources tell us about the major events of the councilistic period? It is clear that the RG was not created for conciliar research. In the RG, to the protagonist from our first part, dedicated to Emperor Sigismund and so on, had been given long entries, some of which also concern the councils. It is also important to bear in mind the Turkish threat, which kept both the council fathers and the Pope and his legates on tenterhooks. One of the most tragic figures from Rome during those years, who had contacts with the highest personalities of the councils, as well as with Hungary, was certainly Cardinal Cesarini, born in 1398 and died in 1444. This Roman scholar was as evidenced by his coat of arms, was a client of the powerful noble family. He is of the colonna. He is of interest to us in two respects. Firstly, as Pope's envoy to the Council of Basel, and secondly, as legate to Hungary. Giuliano Cesarini, Cardinal Diacon of Sant'Angelo, Cardinal Priest of St. Sabina since 1435, was papal legate in Hungary from 1442. What we'll see better in advance. On March 7, 1444, he was appointed Cardinal Bishop of Tusculum. Why I'm emphasizing the cardinal title so much? This list I'm including here because it makes it easier to identify the Cardinal Cesarini. In contemporary sources, cardinals are rarely referred to by their family names, but usually only by their cardinal ranks. So, if you encounter Cardinal Bishop of Tusculum during these years, it is Giuliano Cesarini, Eubel's Hierarchia Catholica, I think you might just heard about, with lists of cardinal titles, provides a helpful tool of identification. Now back to the career of our cardinal. Eugene IV appointed Cesarini president of the Council of Basel in January 1431. After Martin's death in February, he took part in the conclave of 1431 and was confirmed in office by the new Pope Eugene IV. However, the council was opened by his deputies while he himself led the crusade against the Hussites, which ended in a crushing defeat at the Battle of Taus. Cesarini then invited the Hussites to negotiations in Basel. In 1437, he left the council with the papal party. As far as Giuliano Cesarini is concerned, the Vatican sources are abundant. For example, you find there the papal legation mandate, the accompanying letters of recommendation, and powers of attorney of the cardinal from 1431, as well as the legation mandate, the accompanying letters of recommendation and powers, and so on. In the registers, Requat 341, and so on, and you can find it in the RG 2. And in the 1442, Eugene IV sent Cesarini to Hungary as legate to mediate between Vladislav I and Queen Elizabeth. Peace was achieved on December 13, and to prepare a crusade against the Turks. He took part in the long campaign in the winter of 1443-1440. In April 1440, he had King Vladislav and the estates of the Offnolanta swear an oath that they would set out a crusade against the Turks in alliance with the Pope, Venice, and Duke Philip the Good of Burgundy before the end of the summer. On August 4, the king and Henry had to swear again in the Legate that they would undertake the planned crusade under all circumstances and regardless of the peace to be concluded with the Sultan. And you know, I think so, the end of this crusade in the Battle of Varna, today in Bulgaria, when the Cardinal and King Vladislav died. The battle died. In the RG, there is a separate entry for the prominent legate Giovanni Berardi da Tagliacozzo, who became cardinal in 1439 with the title of Sancti Neri et Achillei, and then he became Cardinal Bishop of Palestrina. We will return later to the episode concerning him. And then, as only word for this slide, you see that it is regarding the topic Ferrara, and you can see there are many topics in the RG dealing with Ferrara. And if you are looking to the first example, you will find a German cleric who was addressed to the council, to Ferrara, for having their dealing with this request. So the next slide is dedicated to the RG volume 5. That is the volume dedicated to Eugene V on Hungary. Also, here we have a lot of items, and the first part we will focus on the major events, and the most important one was the coronation of Emperor Sigismund. And the next slide is dedicated to the main bibliography, and I found also the Hungarian edition of the book of Péter Pázmány, dedicated to the coronation of Sigismund in Rome. Numerous Hungarians, many Hungarians accompanied the Roman king, and in the monography of Veronika Roske and in the monography of Péter Pázmány, you find them mentioned in the requested of benefices and privileges. So we come back to the next slide, Vladislav III. Here you can see a register which is dedicated to him and is tricky relationship with Sophia, and yeah, you can imagine what it was, what the RHR is dealing with. I come now to the topic of what we can learn of the slower clergy in the RH, and I present you the bibliography. Important is to have always present the working of the instruments of the patents, petitioners who came to the Curia, and a good overview in the, from the periphery perspective is the introduction of Jadranka Neralic, the long arm of papal authority, and from Thomas Fidelis, the apostolic camera, and in the wider perspective, it's also interesting from Catherine Haida, Italy and Hungary in the early Renaissance. The next slide is giving you the example of Albert of Hungary, who had been also a scholar, and He is not an unknown. He comes from a family from Bosrod country and had a special university training. He studied in the universities of Vienna and Padua and Bologna. And the last one, also receiving the title of Doctor in Canon Law, Albert had an outstanding career for both an ecclesiastical and a lay point of view. Thus, he was chancellor, and he took part in the crusade of Varna together with John Haniede, where they were defeated at the Ottoman Turks. His ecclesiastical career surmounted the positions of Prebendary of Ager and Provost of Edge, from this last position being appointed Bishop of Chenat. The king whom Albert served was Ladislaus Postumus, who was 5 years old at the time the papal bull was issued in 1445. Chenat is located in the westernmost tip of Romania, north of Romania and very close to the Hungarian border. Albert's inclusion in the RG5 may be due to his association with the group of Germans living in Hungary, or rather Transylvania. Here in Buda, I feel very close to Cardinal Cesarini, who, according to the information provided by Clara Pajorin and her essay Alcuni rapporti personali di Pier Paolo Ruggiero in Hungary, stayed in Buda twice during his eventful life. Pajorin also rehabilitates the repetition of this controversial churchman in Hungarian history. It is well known that in the summer of 1445, the cardinal proposed violating the peace agreement concluded with the Turks in Szeged, the fight with the Turks, arguing that the oath made to the pagans was invalid. Later in Hungary, many blamed him for the catastrophe of Varna, and so he became the scapegoat of this affair. The RG5 provides valuable information about the entourage that accompanied Cardinal Cesarini to Hungary in 1442. The Roman embarked on the journey together with Battista de Romanis, il vescovo Bishop of Chieti, and Uditore Apostolico. We know this from RG5, and so we come to the next slide, and this is only for give you an idea of the importance of the RG for the reconstructing the history of Cesarini. This Flemish and then the next one. No? Okay. And there's another German family of Cesarini named Heinrich Sentleben, who appears also in the RG5, who became a companion of Cesarini to Hungary. So we have many names which of persons involved in the affair of Cesarini. The next slide gives you a category of relationships with Hungary in a lower section. Well, the first one is a bishop who came to Hungary in the papal, for papal affairs, and we found him in the IA registers, which are introitus and exitus registers. And the next is, it's next here in the slide, is a Flemish cleric who was sent in Legats papal to Hungary. We have no further information about these clerics, but eventually you can find them in local documents. So I hope future researchers from you. The orators, who could also be laymen, formed a separate category of legates. In 1437, Giovanni di Francesco di Capodistria traveled to Hungary on behalf of the Pope. And the next one is, next slide, are dedicated to other figures in this field. I came now to an information which is giving you an idea that also little information can be of great impact for local historians. It is dedicated to, the next one, to the just mentioned Cardinal Legate Johannes de Tagliacozzo, who came as legate in Partibus Hungariae in 1440. And this is an entry which is good to read also in, without training and in Latin. And it is dealing with the phase of the dedication of the church to a church in Buda, the church of St. Paul, the hermit, near the city in 1414, moved, when the cardinal moved the patronal feast from January the 10th to the third day of Pentecost, on which indulgences could be gained in town. This change is justified by the cold weather prevailing in January, propter frigora, I guess valid for the November days. Yesterday it was really quite cold. The audience of Budapest will be pleased to find this information here in the German register. Why the RG had included this entry, I have no idea. Peter Tuscher was so friendly to help me to identify the site described as the monastery of St. Lawrence of Buda, where the Pauline order founded its first friary. And now it's a ruin to see. Let us turn to further examples of register from the RG 5th that deal with Hungary. It is certainly often worthwhile to look at the originals as well as the register. I would like to demonstrate this to you using the example of a supplication that is registered in both the RG 5th and the MH1I volume 2. So you have Johannes. There are 4 here mentioned in the first register, and in the second one there is no mention of Johannes. There are 4 here. What happened? Both register works deal with the same subject. the news of the supplications of Marcus Georgi, the Archduke, from the Diocese of Pécs, concerning, in short, the Pilgrims' Hospice of St. Stephen near the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which had become vacant due to the resignation of its predecessor, that is the topic of both. What strikes one when we comparing the two registers, I'll make it brief. While the German edition emphasized the relatively uninteresting news that the act of resignation of the predecessor, a certain Giorgio Enrici or Emerici de Boalco, was performed by a German notary, Johannes de Affordia, from Erfurt in Thuringia. The Hungarian edition completely omits the German name. I will tell you right away that according to today's standards, the two registered corpora are very strange and do not actually meet full scientific standards. Mea culpa. Both are quite obviously children of their time and rooted in a national mindset that should actually have been overcome. This reveals the fundamental shortcoming that the systematical registration of Vatican source material should actually be an international undertaking. And unfortunately, practice shows, and I cannot exclude the RG formalists, that the focus continues to be concentrated on every's own country. In the case of the RG, it must be said that the fluid borders of the Holy Roman Empire actually prohibit it from getting too involved in non-German matters. There is simply too much material to cover, and the fact that completing a volume of the RG, especially for long-reigning popes such as Sixtus IV, takes decades is not longer acceptable in today's increasingly fast-paced and short-sighted academic world. So I come to the conclusion. I hope I haven't spoke for too long, and that there is still some time left for questions. My overview was intended to demonstrate the potential that studying the RG can offer even for non-Germans, and especially here in Budapest for Hungarians. There is much that could be explored in greater depth. The students here in this room are attending an entire seminar on the councils of the 15th century. I hope I haven't presented too much that is already familiar to you. In any case, it has been enriching for me to have dealt with the Hungarian perspective and history, albeit in a very superficial way, of course. I would like to thank Peter Tuscher once again for inviting me to Budapest and encourage everyone here in the room who is interested in Vatican sources to visit when coming to Rome for research, not only the Vatican archives, but the German Historical Institute in Rome too. We are located in a little outside the city center, but we have the advantage of being surrounded by greenery and having a well-equipped specialist library on the history of the papacy. Herzlichen Dank und auf Wiedersehen. Questionable Chapel as wish love.
Thank you very much for this lecture. Tales of the Repertorium, Germanicum, RG. Very, very interesting little pieces of the history of the life of the all days and the relation between Hungary, the Empire, and the papacy. Professor Rehberg is dealing with these Vatican sources and works for this Repertorium Germanicum, RG, and this is important, as said, not only for the Germans, not for papacy, but for us, Hungarians too, and we are very, very grateful, not only for this lecture, but for this research. That is very, very important, and the details has shown us that Professor Rehberg is a real researcher, no, not a university teacher only, but a real and splendid researcher, and I am very, very happy that I know him from the Vatican archives from 20 years or 25. Yes, we are getting old and older together. Yes, and now in the next lecture we will repeat everything, and we will speak about Cesarini and the main events of the council. And now we have yet 10 minutes and come the section of the questions. There was a list of the names. I want to rehave it. Very short, because I must register the name of the asking student. The first question. Loud.
So Professor, in the start of the lecture, you were talking about the schism of the church, and you mentioned a conclave where there were 17 cardinals, and 11 of them were French, and yet, if I heard everything right, because I was in the back, and the rest of them were Italian, and yet the Italians had more relevance than they could push their agenda through. And I was wondering how come they could do that when there were so many more French cardinals.
Yes, that's a good question, because actually the question was why the majority of French cardinals agreed on an Italian one, a pope. Surely you can say that wasn't that was not normal. But if you consider that Bartolomeo Prignano was a known person to the cardinals, I wonder if the narrative of the French side is convincing that they made their election by force of the Romans who claimed an Italian pope. You have to consider that the cardinals came from the conclave without protesting immediately. And so the first month Urban was considered pope, and only when the situation was exploding, the Pope was really very, very eager with the cardinals, and the cardinals had been offended by him. The situation points to the disagreement and the schism. So you can believe to the one side or the other side. But the fact is that Urban was considered in the aftermath of the conclave legitimate. And it's strange that the French cardinals got the best.
The history of the papacy with the French, there were always problems. We have spoken about it. From the Council of Vienna in this period and the period of Napoleon and so on. Okay, the next question we have the time. Colleague, please, your name is?
And what is the difference between
No.
what is the difference between local synods and economical synods?
More, I don't understand. Shouting.
Okay, what is the difference between local synods and economical synods?
Councils.
Yes.
Councils. What is the difference between economical and local councils? Synods.
Local councils.
Local councils.
Oh, that is a question which is dealing a competence which is not mine, because there are theological questions about what is a local council,
Yes,
a synod, and council with universal importance. So
We have spoken about it in the first lecture, and maybe Professor Rehberg is more qualified to not to deal with these things. Yes, I think that Oliver, Mr. Kőhalmi has a good question. This is the last question.
So, in the first part of your lecture, you were talking more Latin. So you were talking about the conciliarism, and my question would be that after the Council of Basel, how long and how did this idea or this ideology live in the church history?
that is a good question for another seminary, because I talked about a little bit of the consequences of the conciliar period. Sure, for the immediate time after Basel, the conciliarist series and the necessity fell down, but it was always present in the church history until in the 19th century. And then it became more prominent to talk about in the 20th century with the Vatican II. There's a huge debate on the consequences of conciliarism for the church history. That's a small answer for a big problem.
And now is the age of conciliarism, the new deal of Pope Francis, synodal way, is a revival of, you called it ideology of heresies, maybe, or maybe not. And this is the end of this lecture. I am very next occasion. In 1 week we can follow this discussion without Professor Rehberg, unfortunately. This is the end of this lecture. I thank you very much to be present, and mainly and first of all Professor Rehberg, who is traveled to us from Rome, and in half an hour in Italian lecture we will follow this discussion. Everybody is welcome. Thank you very much. Köszönöm szépen.